name is Prakash Belawadi. I'm a theatre person. I want to thank Coconut Theatre for inviting me to this live session. You know, I would like to concentrate today on speaking about one topic. This interests me a lot. I think one of the great crises of our theatre today is that in the new playwriting that we are doing, with all the experimentation that happens with it, which is very good, it doesn't perhaps focus as strongly as it should have on the classical idea of conflict. Now, what is conflict? In simple human terms, I'll put it like this. You know, there's a hero in all of us. There is a villain, there is a coward, there is a cheat, there's a liar. There is all this in every one of us. And these are the choices we make in our lives. And many times we can actually blame our circumstances for the way we behave, or for the choices we make. But in truth, what we do is our karma. It's a choice that we make. And sometimes we are forced to make choices that we don't want to make because of circumstances. So let me explain what I mean by this in more detail. You know, each one of us has to respond to the call of dharma. You can call it dharma if you believe in such a word, or you can call it a moral code or an ethical principle. Call it what you want. Each one of us is called to actually make the right choice of action, the right choice of speech. We cannot help thought, because we can have all kinds of thoughts. Thoughts occur to us as much as we can think. Thoughts also occur to us without our wanting to think those thoughts. So what is really in your control is what you say and what you do. And you know, in dharma, you're answerable to 5 different things. And this is where the conflicts come. You're answerable, you feel, to your faith, to your religion, or to your ideology, or to your God. Or you have to respond, if you believe in astrology or numerology, to numbers, to the stars, to fate. And you cannot go and control it. There is no matter what action you take, you cannot go and change the planetary alignment. You cannot change God's mind. You cannot change heaven and hell. You cannot change. I mean, whatever you believe. But you feel you're answerable to that. That is one idea of dharma. A second idea of dharma is that we are all actually like subjects of nature. You know, nature is not something we can exploit. We are actually a subject of nature. We are a feature of nature. We are part of the environment. And the nature and its 5 elements, you cannot change or control the 5 elements beyond a point. You can use it for your advantage, and sometimes you're caught in a storm, you're caught in an earthquake. The same earth that gives you food can swallow you up. You know, water can save your life. Water can also drown you in a flood or in torrential rain. So basically, you're answerable to nature. The third is you're answerable to society. And society can mean your family, your parents, your figures of authority, your state, your law, the laws of your country, the rules of office, the rules of business, contracts that you make in public. You're answerable to those. That is the third idea of dharma. The fourth one is, you know, the contract you make with each other, with a lover, with a friend, with another person. The personal contract that you make is a personal ethical obligation that you have to meet. And then the fifth idea of dharma is you're conflicted within yourself. You know what is right. You know at least what is right for you. But sometimes, you know, when you have to study for an exam, you still want to go to a friend's birthday party. And you know, you should not be having that extra drink sometimes when you have a surgery in the morning, let us say. And yet sometimes you make that mistake. So we are conflicted by all these 4 before and within yourself on what choice to make. and yet choices you have to make, and you don't have a choice in that matter. You have to whether you consciously do a course of action or not, you'll be forced to take some action. Now I want to introduce one extra element in this. Humans are conflicted mainly because there is always the factor of time, and time is always running out. If you go to a person you love and say, I would like to be with you for the rest of my life, and the man or the woman, as the case may be, says no, if you have 1,000 years to wait, you feel that he or she can change their minds in the next 100 years or so, and you can wait. But unfortunately, time is always running out. That is the biggest problem that humans face, That is why movies end that you need to get the girl before the plane takes off, or before the train leaves the station, or before the Mangal Sutra is tied, or before the rope frays at the edge of the cliff and he or she falls off. You need to go and stop it before that happens. And that is the idea of time running out that we always have in movies, and it's in a slightly different form in plays. And what is the parallel that we have? We have a parallel in sports. In a one-day match, there are only 5 overs left, or 5 balls left before time runs out and the match ends. There is only a minute left before you can do the equalizing goal in a soccer or a hockey match. And that is why the idea of play there is the same idea of play we have here in the theater, or for that matter in the movies. Time is always running out, and before that time runs out, you must solve the problem that you've set up. And that problem is one of the conflicts that you have to meet. Either nature is the adversary, or the gods or the fates or your adversary, or there is a villain who is against you, or you've broken a law of society and the police is chasing you, and you need to solve something or resolve something before the police get to you. And time is always running out, and you choose a course of action. Now, who chooses this course of action? If you're sitting in a restaurant and somebody says this restaurant is on fire, some people will panic and start crying and not do anything. Some people will run helter-skelter. They'll create a stampede. They'll probably run over little women, little children, women, older people. They'll probably kill more people because of stampede and panic. There'll be some people who will be catatonic with fear, who don't know what to do, who will not move. There are some people who will push aside somebody to get ahead. They don't care what happens to that person as long as they can get ahead. And there is always the hero, this man or woman who decides to stop and do something about the fire itself, who looks to fight fire, to put it out, and who looks to save as many lives as possible. It could be a he or a she. And this person, this protagonist, this hero, man or woman, will always have friends, will have false friends, will have enemies, you'll have a person you thought was an enemy but was a friend, and you'll resolve the problem. But time is running out. If you don't resolve the problem you don't know where the fire is coming from, let us say, or you don't know what formula to use to put out the fire. You don't have any implement. You don't have a source of water to put out the fire. And the fire may soon consume everybody, and you need to do it in this limited time. And then you can have an idea, an epiphany, a moment of sudden insight. And then you know that I can break this tank, this aquarium, and allow water to come out of that. Or I can break that wall and there's a pipeline running there. I can allow water to come from there. You know where water is stored, and you decide to go and do that. I don't know what you do, but you can think of something, and it comes from completely unknown sources. This moment of epiphany. That movie where the kutta knows that this girl is marrying the wrong brother, and that Jyoti comes from the Murti, hits the kutta, the Pomeranian runs upstairs, opens the box, gets that mala and the letter that the brother has written, comes and hands it over to the elder brother, who sees, oh, I was going to make a mistake, I was going to marry the wrong person, my brother loves her, and disaster is averted. Now the kutta has epiphany, that is the problem. But in a better film, in a better story, you will have one of the key characters getting this, and resolving it. Now this is the idea of conflict, that there is an adversarial circumstance. It could be a man or a feature of, or one of the elements, and you need to resolve it before time runs out. And the conflict comes because you have other duties to do. This is like, one is you're putting your life in danger. So you're conflicted with what is good for you with what is good for society. Or you're putting your own wife or your own lover or your own parent or your own child in danger by taking a course of action that can save the world, but you're going to put your own family in danger, let us say. So that conflict is there. Or sometimes you love a person, you're going to marry that person, but you're going to offend your God because in your religion or your faith, you're not allowed to marry that person, let us say. There's a great play by a Kannada playwright called Chandrasekhara Kambar, in which there is this gifted doctor who can solve any disease, any case. So when he goes to a patient's bed, the deity appears, the Shatavi Devi, the deity appears in front of him, and only he can see the deity, and the deity stands next to the patient's bed. And if Shatavi Devi appears on the left of the bed, he should not take the case, because no matter what you do, that patient cannot be cured. If Shatavi Devi appears on the right, it does not matter how hopeless it looks, that patient will get cured. So the doctor becomes extremely famous. And one day the king calls him because the princess is lying in bed and she's dying. And this famous doctor is called. And Shatavi Devi appears on the left side of the bed. But the doctor has fallen in love with the princess already. And he decides to take the case against the will of God or the deity. So you can have a conflict like this. And then the play progresses from there. That is conflict. And you make a choice. And in that choice, if you're really powerful, if you're more powerful than God, or there was another God that could beat this God, and you have the favor of that God, there is no conflict because you can resolve it. If you go and tell the girl, I want to marry you, I'm in love with you, and the girl says yes, and they're happily married, there's no film, there's no play, there's no story, because there's no conflict. The girl says no, and the man says, I will yet pursue it. And then there is a story, because how is he going to overcome this resistance from that girl? So conflict is necessary to build a story told in time. And cinema and theatre are both stories told in time, with this crucial difference that in the theatre, in live art, in performing art, we must bring the bodies for the performance, and we must bring the bodies of the audience to appreciate to the same space-time. It happens in the same time, in the same space, like a spectator sport. This kind of thing that we are doing is a midway home. I mean, a live telecast. You're all bringing your bodies and attention at the same time to this, and we're coming to the same virtual space for this moment. So live art, whether it is a sport or it's theatre, is sacred because of the shared space-time. Theatre is a recorded medium. Cinema is a recorded medium. And there the actors don't have to be there when the audience is watching it. But nevertheless, cinema also has the structure of this conflict that you must handle. There is one last element I will talk about, and then I will open it for questions. See that, like I said, because the adversary has to be much stronger than the protagonist, hero or heroine is. Otherwise, it's not an interesting story. What I mean by that is, let us say that when you're running away from danger or running towards a problem to avert danger, and you come across, let us say, a gap in the on the ground. Let us say there's a big chasm. You have to leap across rocks or across a stretch of water or across two buildings. You see this in the movies all the time. Now the thing is, you wouldn't make that decision in normal time, and you should look like a person who will not make that leap. It should look like that bus in the movie Speed is not going to be able to jump across that bridge. And it's a girl driving it. So the thing is, she's not trained to be a driver. She's that much of an underdog, and she has to take this bus right across that thing. Time is running out. The clock is literally ticking. The bomb will go off, and she makes that decision along with the protagonist, the hero, because when time is running out in your lives, you will make courageous decisions. You will take risks that you would not take otherwise. And if it was so easy, if that bus had wings and it can fly across, then it's not a thrilling moment. That is not a story worth telling. So the thing is, the person who handles the conflict, the protagonist, has to be the underdog, because that underdog represents all of us normal people who are actually always in life itself are panicked by time. Our youth is running out. Our moment to fall in love is running out. Our moment to get a job and earn salary is running out. Our moment to get a promotion is running out. Our moment to have a child in marriage is running out. Our moments are always running out. We are always panicking because of time. And that is how we can relate to it. And then, you are called upon in real life to make courageous decisions, to bite the bullet and to do the right thing by dharma. If you are willing to cheat, it's not a great story to tell. You have to be dharmic and you have to do karmic. You have to do conscious action, taking risks, working hard with truth and passion on your side, and hope that good comes out of it. This is the nature of conflict. And it is granular in our storytelling. That means in every moment of the storytelling, people behave because they're framed by this problem of conflict. And everybody is put in that frame and they appear different. Your uncle is no longer a normal person. Your uncle can become a rival or a friend. Your brother is no longer a normal person. Your brother can be fighting with you for property and not be like Lakshman or Ram. Or it could be your wife can be, can be a person who sometimes can be on the side that is your enemy. We face these moments in our lives and everybody is helpless. There are no real villains in life. There are only people who are willing to act for the right side with courage or not. And then you become villainous at that point. It can happen to any one of us. That is why art is great, because what happens in our real life, it can show us by distancing us from the time space that we occupy in our lives in an aesthetic time space where you can understand it. It is not the tears you have when you watch a movie or a play, or when Sachin Tendulkar or Virat Kohli gets out at 99, India loses by a ball. The sadness you feel is not real sadness of your life. It is an aesthetic of sadness where you understand sadness. Nothing happens to Virat Kohli. From the hot sun, he'll go and sit in the shade of the pavilion or dressing room and get a lemonade perhaps. Nothing happens to him in reality. But the pain you feel is an aesthetic of experience that you can't understand in real life because you can't distance from the pain you have in real life, which you can do in the experience of art. And for that, conflict is important. For that one run to matter. For that one moment in time to matter. This story told in time must have conflict. It must have sthayi bhava. It must have sentiment. Something you feel for your team. Something you feel for your nation. Like in the song Simon Garfunkel says, where are you, Joe DiMaggio, great baseball player? A nation turns its lonely eyes to you. He becomes a hero. The underdog in the story becomes the representative of goodness that we all have in all of us. This call to action that we all feel, and sometimes because of our own panic, our worry, our greed, our pettiness, or our fear, we don't do the right thing. That's why art is important. And art must have conflict in artistic narratives of time. Okay? So thank you, Megan Furnace, who says, oh, that is profound aesthetic of sadness. I love that. Thank you. You know, one of my gurus in theatre, K.V. Subarna of Ninasam, look it up. He once told me that much of what I said to you, but he said, when on the stage, actors act so well, they can create a moment of belief that the actors can produce, sweat, discoloring of skin, their hair can rise, they have tears, the voice changes. When they can produce this feeling, and the audience also cries, whose pain is it? Because you're mentioning sadness, whose pain is it? Actually, it's not the pain of the actors, because that day, in fact, that moment on stage is over, when they go to the wings, they'll do high fives. They'll party that day because they're very happy for creating that moment. The audience loves their play. They'll probably come back to watch their movie. The thing is, whose sadness was it? The characters don't exist. They're abstractions. That is the aesthetic that I'm talking about. Yeah. Sagar Shahaji Kadum says, sir, your father, Mr. Belawadi, Nanjundaya Narayan, popularly known as Makeup Nani. Can you share details about him? He was a great theatre personality in Kannada. Yeah, he was. He met my mother when she was in junior college. She was acting in a play. Those days, they didn't allow boys and girls to mix on stage. So if you did a play, it had to be either an all-girl cast or all-male cast. And my mother was doing a male role. And my father used to do makeup even in those days. So he went to do makeup for her. And he began to paint a moustache for her. And my mother said, I believe, look, I want it to look authentic. I don't want this thing. I want you to, attach crepe hair for me. And my dad, because, she was a nice looking girl and he was a young man, said to her, the problem is sometimes people can get an allergy and they can have real hair growing if I do that. It's okay for men, but is it okay for you? And I believe my mom thought for a moment and said, it doesn't matter. I've decided never to get married, so it doesn't matter. So I would like to do authentic makeup. And he fell in love with her and he pursued her over many years after that. And eventually they got married. So the house I grew up in was called Green Room, So, yeah, that's a big story in Kannada theatre circles. My father is not alive. He died about 16 years ago. But my mother is still alive. She still does theatre, although she's kind of struck by viral arthritis and she cannot be as active as she wishes to be, but she still writes and she still acts. Tushar Raman Oza says, adore your allusions to aesthetic distance with karmic and dharmic references. This matters to me a lot. This matters because, we are all helpless. Can we say we are not helpless? Is there any one of us here who can say that we have everything we want? There is nothing else to aspire for or work for. There are no more risks to take. Even if we have a week to live, can we say there are no more risks to take? See, there's a short story by an author that I'm very fond of, George Orwell. It's called, I think, A News of a Hanging. And I think it's personal and biographical. There is this man who is being taken for the hanging. It's a public hanging. And people always want to watch the macabre tragedy that happens to other people. It's a kind of relief, that it doesn't happen to you. So people have gathered to watch the hanging. And there's a policeman who's the constable who's actually tied a handcuff to himself and the other cuff to the prisoner. and they're walking towards the rope hanging there. And as they're walking in the middle of on the way to the noose, there is a puddle of dirty water. And the man who's going to be hanged, he sees the dirty water in his pathway, and he actually stretches as much as he can so that he skirts that puddle and he walks to the hanging. So even in his moment of dying, he has an idea of personal aesthetic of cleanliness. So this is who we are. This is how we live. This is our life, and we all are conflicted about doing the right thing, which is why there is much to learn from art. The budget for culture gets cut every year in every state in India, and people think you can spend on industry, on production, on road building, on flyovers, on better cars, on even bigger flyovers, on bullet trains, and you'd think you don't need to spend on culture. Let me tell you, if we could spend more money on culture, on the arts, and you created a public that was more appreciative of dharma and the idea of karma, of doing the right thing, then you probably won't need so many prisons. You won't need homes with security guards and high compound walls. You won't need such a big police force. And if the world could understand this, maybe you don't need to spend so much money on your borders, on weapons that kill other people. It's precisely because the world lacks a sense of dharmic aesthetic that we have more weapons per person than more food per person, than more water per person. That's why we have the climate crisis, and that's why we have so much hatred. So I am all for art, and we shouldn't depend. The artist must depend only on these two things: the audience that is within hearing distance and the audience that is within seeing distance, even if it's by way of virtual screen, by a movie theater or a television or an online screen. That is, the artist must depend on this audience to be in the art. Otherwise, when you depend on a sponsor or you depend on the government will push its ideology and it'll curb criticism. The sponsor will push his product, whether it's good or bad for society, and the sponsor will not sponsor a play or an artistic narrative that challenges that product or service. For an artist to be free, the artist must depend on the audience, and for the audience to get good art, they must support the good artist. That's what I believe. Sonal Dhami says, "Good evening, sir. Know you after watching ALF. What an irritating father character. You were awesome. Read about you in Wikipedia. So much profession you like most, being a teacher or an activist or an actor, yeah, or journalist, and why?" Because those of you who are interested in the theater, and I'm assuming that we have a sizable audience here that is interested in performing art, I will tell you this. We can do different characters and we can do different stories because many things interest us. Today, our greatest concern, something that should unite humanity, is climate change, for instance. The thing is, we cannot unite everybody across the causes of victimhood, but we can unite everybody on the causes of common good. And there is much we can do for the common good. If there is clean drinking water coming out of a tap, it's very good for everybody. If there is very clean air, which does not carry too much poison, which will damage your kidneys or your lungs, or as we can see now, it will not infect you with a virus. If you couldn't have cleaner air everywhere, it'll benefit the rich and the poor. Actually, there is a dharmic leveler in the COVID crisis because this is not a virus that rich people can secure themselves from. It affects presidents and it affects the poorest alike. It doesn't spare anybody, it seems. So I'm saying that if we could have the cleaner elements, cleaner air, cleaner energy, cleaner water, cleaner food for all, it'd be good for all. A cleaner planet, a healthier planet is good for everybody. Money is good for a very few people, it seems now, because very few people make money at the cost of very large numbers of people. 1% of the population has as much wealth as 50% of the population of the world. That is greed, and it's quite stupid if you ask me. I mean, you're going to die sooner or later. What the hell does it mean? Your children will quarrel over that money, file cases, and destroy whatever little aesthetic they could have. They won't even have the aesthetic of a loving a parent. You make a lot of money and you need to create security systems for it, even against your own family sometimes. So I'm saying that the problem of the world is this, that we do not have an aesthetic window of dharma for the world. Priyanshu Parashar asks, sir, what is the anatomy of a great actor? What does an actor have? Truly, what does an actor have? You have your body. What else do you have? Even your voice will be good or bad, depending on your health, depending on how well you look after your body, eventually. And your voice will go like your body will go, because we're running out of time. So what else does an actor need apart from your body and your mind and your voice? You must have your memory. How do you have memory? Do you remember what all you did in the day? Actually, even in the same day, you forget everything you did, because you can remember only things of significance. Like in a movie, they don't show everything that happens. In a play, you see everything. You see action and reaction at the same time. But in a movie, you can cut. I can show the car stopping in front of the building. I can cut to the professor walking into the room. And I know that the professor came from the car. And I don't show him climbing the steps, walking down the corridor. Unless it has meaning for the story, I don't show. In real life, what are the cuts? The cuts are done in the mind. Only significant memory you can have. Now, how can you have significant memory? If you have memory of significance that you share with somebody you love, a moment of marriage, a moment of saying I love you, a moment of feeling love, a moment a child is born, a moment you made a first friendship with somebody that has lasted as a friend 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. You can have only when you have significant memory that you can actually have a significant mind that you can bring to acting. A significant memory is required to have a significant mind. Which is why art is important, because what happens in the common world, what is commonplace in the world, art does two things. It makes the unfamiliar familiar and makes what is familiar unfamiliar. Which is why in a play or a film you can see so many you can see action sequences, fights on the mountain cliff. You can see police stations and extreme places like nursing homes, dungeons, things happening underwater or in the sky or in space. Outlandish things are made familiar to you. Those are not conflicts you enjoy in real life. You're faced with in real life, but they're brought to you so you can understand the nature of conflict in a distance of narratives that are not familiar to you. Or art does something else. It takes stories of home. It can, when you go to a policeman's home or a doctor's home or a FBI agent's home or a president's home or an MLA's home, what happens is, or an underworld don's home, you see this person as a human being. Actually, you don't see people in uniform typical as human beings. But when you see tragedy that happens, a soldier dies, when you see tragedy inside the soldier's home, that becomes something that was familiar to you. You see tragedy that happens in your own house, but you don't have an aesthetic of it. But when you see it in a high register narrative. What is familiar to you? Motherhood, parenthood, conflict of property, duty to nation, tone with duty to home, giving up a job for the nation. All these become big ideas then, This is what art can do. My favorite classical playwright, although I don't understand him fully, continues to be Kalidas. I wish I could read him in original Sanskrit, and that is one of the aims I have. I wish to read the classics in the original. I wish I could learn Persian and Greek too, but I don't know if I'll be able to do that. But I certainly want to start with Sanskrit, and I've given myself 2 or 3 years so that I'll be able to read the original works of the classics. In Sanskrit. I mean the Ramayana and Mahabharata too. I think these are great works. Of course, I like Shakespeare, and I like Greek drama. These are my favorite classical things. I like Greek drama in Plato's dialogues as well. There is great conflict in Plato's dialogues. It starts with a question of conflict, actually, the dialogues always. And the conversation is very dramatic. So I like them a lot. I like the conflicts that I see in original religious pioneers. I'm not religious and I don't like religion. I don't like any religion. But I like religious figures who are faced with conflict and who look to answer questions, be it of any faith. I like them. I don't like their followers that much, but I like religious figures as humans, and the fights that they faced, and the great inspirational choices they made, the great sacrifices they had to make. Somebody's asked me, when you refer to aesthetic, are you referring to the rasa? Yes, in a way, yes. Because, what is rasa? Rasa is eventually a sthai bhava, I would say. It means that in the audience, you produce a knowledge, a personal knowledge of the feeling of valor. It is not the valor that a soldier actually feels in the battlefield, but you feel the nature of valor within yourself and you feel moved by it. That is rasa. And that is a sthai bhava. And it comes from the sanchari bhavas that the soldier feels at that moment. He feels the duty to his family. Should I take this jump? I'm newly married. My wife is pregnant. If I leave, who will look after her? Shall I take this risk? He has a moment of personal fear. What if I break my leg? What if I become invalid? What if I become a useless person, a vegetable who doesn't even have a mind? Is it worth taking that leap? And what am I doing it for anyway? The nation didn't give me my pension. It hasn't given me a raise in my salary. It has given somebody who is less meritorious than me. It has given him a promotion and denied me. Why should I do it for his nation? All these sanchari bhavas the soldier feels. And we also feel all those sanchari bhavas. But through those sanchari bhavas, you feel a moment of valor. That is sentiment of valor. And that is the sthai bhava. Yeah, that is what I was referring to. You're right. What is your favorite play by Shakespeare? Maybe Macbeth. No, Shakespeare is very great. In many plays he has many moments of greatness, but maybe Macbeth, because you'd never feel, even at the end, you never feel that this was a bad person, but that he made a bad choice. It's a great achievement to make you feel like that. Shakespeare has these moments. I don't know about you, but if you read Hamlet, you can always see a person who is troubled, a very sensitive, a very romantic figure, a melancholic figure as Shakespeare portrays him. But Do you feel you are like that person? It's very hard, I feel, with Hamlet to feel like that. So Shakespeare knows how to create characters he lets you identify with sometimes, and he doesn't let you identify with other times. He can create characters who you can admire but don't want to be. He can create characters whom you can see as what this person says is right, but somehow you don't feel sympathy for this person. Shakespeare is very good, and I think he achieves a kind of sustained magic in Macbeth. And I also feel he manages that because I think that's the shortest Shakespearean play. So he can actually keep it very tight, the action and the consequence there. Tushar Raman Oza is asking, could you kindly speak about empathy in the context of karma and dharma? I just touched upon it now, right? I think, you feel a lot of pain for Karna in the Mahabharata, and you tend to forgive him for all the mistakes that he makes. Karna is caste conflicted. He does not know that he's actually Kshatriya till it's revealed to him. But in the Mahabharata, it gives him this thing of saying he has a genetic memory perhaps of it, like that it gives, he has a vyasana of being a Kshatriya perhaps. But he's also mean-spirited because of that. He's ashamed of his caste, which is that of a carpenter. Because when she says Suta, his hand trembles. Very a proud person, his hand shouldn't tremble. If you tell a Kodava, for instance, in Karnataka, you're a Kodava, his hand will not tremble. He's proud to be that, But, Kshatriya, this Karna is not that. He joins a school to learn some craft by giving a false caste certificate. He goes and claims he's a Brahmin to learn something. He's when Duryodhana, who is like a fighter, he wins through this game of dice, he wins Draupadi also. It is Karna, because he detests Draupadi so much, who suggests that she be molested there. He says, she belongs to you now, she's your property, he says, because he has the meanness in his heart. But whenever you tell people, they'll see, but see how society treated him. But see how society treated him is a stupid thing, because see how Karna treats society. He's willing to wage such a big war that involves such massive destruction, where so many innocent people will die because these Atirata Maharathas, these big people are willing to fight, and the grass is getting trampled underneath. Karna does not have a moment of thought for the Samaj that you are saying created him. The Samaj that created him is actually beneath him and is willing to crush them for personal revenge. I'm saying, but yet you forgive him because in the narrative and the flow and the power that it creates, you feel empathy for Karna. This is what art can do, that you can look at a person who has done wrong and yet you feel a moment for that person. Like that man who's going for the hanging, you feel a moment, in that moment you feel that, he has dignity, that he didn't walk through that puddle. It's almost like an act of great courage, when you look at it. So art can create these strange empathies, it can create. Karna and Bhishma are your favorite characters because of Tyag they make. Bhishma makes that Tyag because he wants to continue power in his family. Were he a really good person, in my opinion, Bhishma would have handed over the throne to the best person, that he knows in his circle of friends perhaps, not to his weak and ineffective brother. He does it for what you people detest today as nepotism. But yet, in the way Mahabharata has been told to you, I'm sure you must feel for Bhishma. I don't. And You are saying we must have empathy for Karna, nevertheless, you say. We must have is a fatwa. You can have. I should be allowed not to have. I have a lot of empathy with Draupadi, you know, who's denied a childhood in the Mahabharata. Actually, she's born from the Yagna, so she never has experienced childhood. She has no childhood friends. She is created out of the selfishness of a father who wants to settle a score, you know, with Drona. It's a property dispute that they have, and she's an instrument created for that. I have a lot of empathy for her, because a lot of good people, especially soldiers who die for their country, for people who are not grateful for that sacrifice, who think they're smarter than them, these so-called public intellectuals of India, third-rate people who do it for third-rate politicians who are willing to go to war to perhaps to win elections, you know, such a thankless job they do. I have empathy for them, because I think people who have dharma in their heart today, who want to do the right thing, don't get the sympathy of the public, you know. So I don't have that much sympathy for Karna or Bhishma. And you must not say you must have. You must have is a fatwa. And you know, I reject fatwas. Sir, any play which you watch as an audience that made you mesmerized? You know, I watched a play by my theatre guru, Prasanna, who I rate as the finest, greatest theatre director in India. He did a play for NSA repertory. I think it's called Fujiyama. It's an adaptation from one of the central USSR republics, those days USSR, and it's a great play. You know, it's a fantastic play. I've acted in a play that mesmerized me in Australia called Counting and Cracking. You can all look it up. It won many awards. I acted as one of the key roles in that play. So you can watch that play. It's one of the latest plays that I've seen. Fascinating. A couple of years ago, I watched a production of Othello in London at the National Theatre with this black actor called Alastair somebody, I forget, and the other actor who played Iago also. Absolutely fascinating production. There was a Sri Lankan playwright who was doing a play in a smaller theatre, Orange Theatre or something it's called Paper Dolls, a Philippine play with Filipino actors, very good play. Yeah, many plays. You know, Ekalavya, for instance, you know, I have sympathy for him because he's groomed in values that actually are not good for him. This is what religion is, for instance. Actually, religion is taught to a child in school, and that religious education may not be good for the child. You know, that child may have had the potential to be a doctor, a scientist, you know, a great philosopher, the president of India, perhaps. But the child is forced to go to undertake religious education because a parent or the law in this country permits it. That's what happens to Ekalavya. He's a skilled athlete, a sports figure of great potential, who's self-taught, you know, but he's given values of Guru Dakshina, okay, and he's made to pay that. Because he is young and impressionable and he's emotional, he cuts off his thumb for a mean teacher who didn't really deserve to be a guru, for Drona, who does it because he wants to keep the Kshatriya clan alive, and he wants to have the favor of the Kshatriya prince Arjuna because he wants them to be powerful to destroy his enemy, Drupada, for a property dispute. Okay, so you're using, in this case, what you call a fake dharma, you teach to a great sportsman to actually secure personal revenge or property for a clan. So that is what I mean. You know, I feel for Ekalavya more than I feel for Karna. Ashwatthama, you know, He doesn't like his father doesn't like him. And Ashwathama is actually loyal. He's a Vyangya of loyalty and is loyal to Duryodhana. He's a pointless figure of tragedy, which is what suicide bombers are, for instance. Their lives don't matter, and they think other lives don't matter. Other lives also don't matter because of that. Arun Rajankar says, do you watch Marathi drama? Yes, I've watched. I used to come to Bombay when I was young, and I used to watch, that Chabildas auditorium plays. I mean, you young people may not know it now, but great theatre used to happen in that small auditorium, experimental work. So I used to come and watch it. I've also seen professional Marathi drama sometimes. The Marathi intellectual tradition and artistic performance tradition is a great inspiration for India. And really, I feel for Mumbai and Pune in this COVID moment, because these artists, not only are their livelihoods snatched from them, but the reason to live even is being taken away by this COVID thing. I feel really bad for them, and I would like to take a moment to wish this feeling of empathy and solidarity with them. Sudipta Mukherjee asks, what is the future of Indian theatre? This is a question that is being asked for the last 3,000 years. The gods became so jealous of drama that Bharata did, that Nahusha, who was the Indra of the time, or Nahusha brought it back, I don't remember now. The Indra takes away theatre to Indraloka because the gods become so jealous of theatre art. They don't want it to be on earth. And I think Nahusha brings it back to earth. I've forgotten the legend. So this question has been asked for the last 3,000 or 4,000 years. I think, and I'm hopeful that the question will be asked another 3,000 or 4,000 years from now. Live art will never go. As long as there is a story to tell and a performer to tell that story and an audience member, one person to listen to it, theatre will exist in empty space at any time. Is there a play you want to perform or direct? Why? I'm adapting a play adapting the novel by S.L. Bhairappa, the novel Parva. Please look it up. It's actually based on the Mahabharata. I'm adapting that into a 6-hour performance piece for a professional repertory called Rangayana in Mysore. And as soon as COVID lockdowns are open up for us and we are permitted, I'll begin rehearsals. Hopefully for Dasara, I will open with this play and will bring it to at least metros of India during the course of next year. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you so much. Thank you.